Welcome to the Crazy Wisdom Podcast. I've got Rocco Miich here, and he is AI ethics and alignment researcher. And we're also going to talk about ice colonization, but really interested to also dive into decentralized AI alignment. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So where should we start first? We got the ice colonization. I kind of want to go into decentralized AI alignment because there's probably a connection. Actually, let's start there. What is the
Cool.
connection between ice colonization and decentralized AI alignment?
That's a good question. That's a good question. So basically, we're moving into an age where most likely AI is going to take over most of the work, most of the power, most of the productivity that humans currently do. Um, And, I mean, that's a big technological transition. Big technological transitions have big socio-political implications. Gunpowder is a prime example of this. In the world before gunpowder, a single medieval knight or champion with his armor and his sword could basically kill pretty much an unlimited number of peasants who didn't have armor and training.
Whoa.
Then gunpowder came along and it became much more one-to-one. Like one man with a gun against 10, the one is going to lose. Even three against one, the one is potentially going to lose with that kind of technology. So it completely upended feudal Europe. It was a sort of extinction level event for that socio-political system, and we're never going back to that. And I think that AI, as it currently exists and as it's likely to exist in the next several decades, or at least the next 10 years, is probably going to completely upend the current socio-political system that's based around, a middle upper class of knowledge workers. Um, basically people like us, are going to completely lose our livelihoods. And probably, the lower middle class, the people who, they drive taxis or they repair sinks or they're plumbers or whatever, that those as well. So basically, most human jobs that are associated with achieving some kind of goal, whether it's writing a good article or um, driving somebody or fixing a toilet or anything like that, those are gone, right? Those are finished. It's like, we've got maybe 10 years tops before 90% of those are completely gone. So there's going to be a new world, and I think it's still largely up for grabs what that new world is going to look like. Um, but it's quite, that there is potential for this new world to simply not have anything like us in it, right? And they may still be humans, but they may be absolutely nothing like us. They may be as different from us as the sort of industrial revolution population was from the medieval world, and as the medieval world was from the, hunter-gatherer world, right? Um, so I think there's a lot that's up for grabs in terms of trying to get the best out of this and avoid planning our own obsolescence.
So there's a few things we can go into. What I
Hmm.
never hear, I hear that a lot. I hear what you just said a lot, but I never hear like what it does to society, probably because it's in the future and we can't really predict that. But like, what does it actually mean? Because where does it accrue? The value that I got from what you said that essentially agents are going to be goal oriented better than we can be goal oriented, either
Yes.
at the robotic level of a plumber or the taxi driver or anything like that, but also at the knowledge work level of achieving abstract goals within software development or all the other things that we do. And
Yeah.
but then once that happens, like there's still a human who is aggregating that value, right? You mentioned the sort of post-human idea that what means to be a human might also change. But in the end, there's always that subjective kind of human. And like, is it neo-feudalism? Is it just like a very, very small sliver of the population gets all the value accrued to it
Yeah,
through?
I mean it's kind of starting to look like that. It does look a lot like neo-feudalism. Um, it could all so another decision point is whether AIs themselves become legal entities.
Mm,
So people haven't talked about this very much, but the survival of humanity probably does depend on banning AIs from being legal entities, preventing
mm,
them from owning companies and operating laws,
Mm.
open lawsuits and stuff like that. If we fail at that, then it's quite possible that we get just human extinction. If we succeed at that, then we're heading for sort of by default a neo-feudalist system where a few people
Ooh.
control the real AI moats, people like say Sam Altman, and everyone else is basically some kind of peasant who can't pay for their own existence, and so they are at the mercy of the new AI feudal lords. And
So
that also not great. Um,
yeah, well, it's
but
really
I think we can do better than that.
yeah, it's a very interesting point you make because this also happened to corporations, and a lot of people talk about capitalism, most particularly Nick Land, sort of capitalism basically being a proto AI, a proto agent, and that in the 14th Amendment, the same amendment that freed the slaves in the United States, and they needed to do some sort of amendment to basically create citizenship for these people who didn't have citizenship. Somehow, the corporations also became citizens through both the 14th Amendment and then also a court case in Santa Clara in the heart of Silicon Valley before it became Silicon Valley with a railroad case that where the Santa Clara was trying to tax the railroads and the
Yeah.
railroads used the 14th Amendment to basically establish corporate personhood. And
Mm.
it seems pretty dystopian at the moment because it doesn't seem like that entity it can be stopped in terms of then extending its legal entities into AI. Do you agree? Do you disagree? That it's sort
Well,
of
I'm not an expert on corporate law, but my understanding is that although corporations are legal persons for some purposes, they don't have the same rights as a real human in within
mm,
the legal system.
so there's some subtlety
Um,
basically that although they have the right to free speech and the right to sort of create money to give money that they're not full citizens. It's sort of an illusion that they're
as far as I'm aware, there are certain legal rules that require the real human is ultimately in control.
interesting.
You can't just have, like some kind of matryoshka doll shell corporations with no person involved.
Mm,
I believe there are laws against that. Um, so yes, I mean, I think the bigger risk is basically that there is a lot of um, what I'd call embedded or implicit alignment in the way the world works.
mm,
So, if you have a government that uses policemen and soldiers to
mm,
uphold the law, the real rules for that country are a superset of or not even a superset, they're a different set of rules than the rules that are written down. Because there are certain things that maybe the government could legally tell the police and the army to do that they wouldn't actually carry out, right? There's always the danger of a rebellion that keeps
mm,
government in check. Um, so if we replace human soldiers with AI soldiers, human police with AI
mm,
police, that takes off a huge safety restriction on governments and other organizations where in the past they always had to somehow persuade people, humans, to actually execute their orders. Whereas, in the future that will not necessarily be the case. You can call this so I've called this benign
interesting.
misalignment. So basically, humans are not perfectly aligned. Humans are rebellious. They want to do their own thing. Humans have their own moral codes that sort of supersede their orders. And so humans are misaligned, but often they can be misaligned in a benign way.
Mm,
So getting rid of benign misalignment is a huge deal. It means that basically governments, corporations, etc., can basically just do whatever they want to us as long as the formal system that they operate in, the rules, the code, whatever, allows them to do it. And the thing is, these formal systems, we're not very good at controlling them. Um, we have a history of these formal systems going completely off the rails. Of our lawmakers who make laws, they often have absolutely no idea what the consequences of the laws they're making are actually going to be.
yeah.
You have things like the Patriot Act. You have things like in the UK, anti-terror legislation, which was rushed in response to bombings from various Islamic terrorist organizations, and that legislation is now being used to persecute, Christians, English people who are not, terrorists, right? They're, doing a protest outside an abortion clinic or something, and then they get arrested under anti-terror legislation. So basically, we are very bad at making formal rules um, that truly express our preferences about how the world should work.
Mm,
And this is sort of an old set of ideas that goes back to my training, should we say, in this field on less wrong from people like Nick Bostrom and Eliezer Yudkowsky, so the AI misalignment field. But I think it's sort of worse than that,
mm,
in that a lot of the time, these things that are bad are sort of bad on purpose, right? If you're a government and you can sneak in some piece of legislation that can be reinterpreted to be broader than it really was intended to be, you might actually like that. You might be like, great. And so it all actually becomes this social game of trying to sneak in legislation, basically people spend a lot of their intelligence trying to use subterfuge to undermine other people's positions, to cheat other people, to, get people to agree to things that are not necessarily in their interest.
and it's
Yeah.
specifically inside of government too, because it feels like this is the main innovation I would say in the United States government is that the founders of our country basically recognized that government needed to be restrained in this very
Yes.
interesting way, in a somewhat decentralized, somewhat centralized way. I was just reading about Thomas Jefferson and
Yeah.
Alexander Hamilton and how they both Jefferson was did not want a strong federal government.
Yeah.
And he won until FDR took over, and then all of a sudden
Yes.
had an explosion in the federal government. And it
Yeah.
feels like that's what we need for AI. We need some people who can design it in a way that is decentralized and has checks and balances. Because what I'm also getting from what you're saying is that the government is the main one trying to what like it's complicated because we exist in a global state, and in the US the Biden administration was trying to align AI to do what I believe you were just saying, which is like balls to the wall, let's control this thing and turn it into a North Korea for AI.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And yeah.
absolutely. The government is really a battleground between different factions, right?
Mhm.
Um, there isn't one single goal. There isn't one single utility
Yeah,
function that's
interesting.
control of the government. There's a
Yeah.
number of different factions. They're using these processes and procedures as a way of basically fighting against each other in a
Yeah.
non-kinetic way. Um, and a lot of things are like this, right? Corporations, once they start to get big, turn into these battlegrounds
Yeah.
where
So
people
yeah.
are doing non-kinetic warfare against each other and they're trying to advance their pet causes or advance their careers or whatever. And this is why you get small corporations generally are more like a single expected utility maximizer
Yeah,
trying
interesting.
to achieve a particular goal, but once they become big, um they start to develop their own ecology of goals and values and competition, right? Uh, and this is how you get things like Google basically starts a bunch of small projects and then they all get cancelled because like somebody's promotion depended on, this project being greenlit, and then once it's greenlit, they don't need it anymore, so they just dump it. So yes, I mean our formal systems of governance they are what I would call, conditionally aligned, and they're not
Yeah.
even really that aligned with people's interests, but they're at least like not terrible, right? The bad things about our current administrations are bad, but they're not like Terminator level bad, right?
And they're not like historically examples bad as either. Like
They're
there's
not like, yeah, they're not like Pol Pot levels of
yeah,
bad, right?
yeah.
Pol Pot comes into the city, and this is the genocide in Cambodia, and like rounds up everyone who's wearing glasses, and like sends them into a field, and then I won't even say what happens then, but
Hmm. Yeah.
people
They're
can
not that
Google.
bad, but they're kind of like inching their way to that bad or well
Sure. So yes, I mean there are certain forces that want to wage their little cultural wars and stuff like that, but basically, human governance in at least the West and most of the rest of the world is this sort of ecology, right? It's not really a purposeful system with a single goal, right? It sort of pretends to be that. Okay, so the government pretends to be a purposeful machine whose goal is to make the country better and improve everyone's lives. But in reality, it's this ecology of different factions all fighting each other and trying to get the rules rewritten in ways which advantage them and trying to reinterpret existing rules in ways which advantage them and disadvantage their enemies and so on and so
But
forth. The
isn't that
problem is we're
yeah,
going to inject
yeah.
AI into this,
Yeah.
right? Okay, this is not really what we want to inject AI into because injecting AI into this ecology of different, competing factions, um, it seems like it will result in a new equilibrium where people who hold capital will have a lot more power,
Mm,
and people who have the ability to set formal rules will have more power, and people who have informal power by being a citizen or a policeman or a parent or
mm,
whatever will basically lose everything. So kind of like AI, when you insert it in the most simplistic possible way into the current human governance system for running the world, will be a disaster,
mm.
a moral disaster. And it's kind of hard to predict what it will look like, but we have had some little inklings of it from like the Google, Google Gemini, woke Black
Yeah.
Viking, that kind of thing.
And the most
Most
recent
people,
Meta creating agents and then immediately creating fake user profiles
oh
with
yeah,
AI. And that's another great example of what you were just
yeah,
talking
yeah, yeah. So Meta did this. So yes, so like by just being a person
about.
who can post content,
Yeah.
right? You have a certain amount of power on these social networks because the social networks, they don't need you specifically, but they do need some people. A social network with no people, no matter how rich the founders are, no matter how powerful their computers are,
Yeah.
is kind of worthless. And so there's a limit to what they can do to piss off the user base. But if they can create these fake AI people and then they can just control these fake AI people as if they're a botnet, right? And you post an opinion and say, hey, I don't like this thing the government's doing, and then 500 people
Yeah.
downvote you and post that you're wrong and all this stuff, and you think, oh, maybe I'm
Uh,
wrong, maybe I'm wrong about it. And they're all bots, they're
yeah.
all fake people
So
made
dystopian.
by AI and all maybe controlled by the same person from like a virtual control room that can just set what these people's opinions going to be.
Whoa. So
So yes, I mean AI, this is a good example of it that I didn't think of. AI will disempower informal human power, right?
yeah.
The informal power of being a person, being a worker, being a colleague, a parent, a friend. All of these things will be vastly decreased in value. And what will be increased in value is formal power and formal capital. So money, positions on, committees and organizations with formal legal power. And what this basically means is that if humanity as we currently know it wants to survive, we have to formalize the informal. We have to formalize
Mm.
the informal goals and rules of our current society and basically program it into our own AIs and own them and use that to carve out a niche for ourselves in the AI-driven future.
Is
Even if it's a small niche, this AI-driven future could be extremely large. So a small niche, 1%, even one part in 1,000 of the future going to, approximately early 21st century humans is fantastic.
yeah.
But I'm sort of starting to worry that actually, the equilibrium result of this is that we get nothing at all, we just get destroyed. Like, all of our informal power, all of our ability, our voice, our money, all of that gets destroyed, it gets taken away. And it's hard to predict what's left, but it may look a little bit like this, as you said, as like Mark Zuckerberg spinning up a billion new people. Um, that kind of thing. And if you don't have that kind of power and that kind of access to AI, to the controls of it, then you're worthless. You're going to lose all your money. You're going to lose your property. Your children are going to be impoverished. They're not going to be able to get jobs, etc.,
So
etc.,
I
etc.
want to talk about because this is all very interesting and this is all the current state kind of going into the future. But you're talking about we started on decentralized AI systems. And
Yeah.
to me, it feels as if one part of AI is a centralizing tendency, but there's another part that is a decentralizing tendency. And the DeepSeek model is a good example of this. The open source Chinese model that is basically took way less compute to train. Most like there's the open source is catching up. The fact that Meta actually did somewhat open source their LLMs because they realized that they couldn't really compete with OpenAI at that same thing, or there's a whole bunch of things that go into that. But there's this decentralizing tendency, and it does level the playing field, just like your example of the gunpowder versus the knight. AI does give small groups of human beings who are aligned in their values more power in some ways. Do you
Yeah, I
agree?
mean, it does in the so the problem is in the long term, what will
Uh,
happen with AI is there will be various moats that will develop,
uh,
and so people sort of thought that maybe making a model at all was a moat, and it turns out it really isn't,
mhm.
because the data that these models are made from, like the foundation models, is either it's publicly available data or the people who made the model actually, stole the data and violated copyright anyway.
Yeah,
So they don't have a legal moat there.
yeah,
Um, so just like having a model, having a foundation model isn't a moat.
yeah,
Having the compute is probably going to be something of a
yeah,
moat,
yeah.
because that compute is inherently centralized, because if you have 1,000 people who each try to run a small computer, they're going to get less performance per dollar than one person who runs a computer that's 1,000 times bigger. So compute is going to be centralizing. Um,
Do we have
and there are probably going to be some other things that are centralizing, probably like bespoke data sets. So,
yeah.
and these bespoke data sets are really sort of like the moat for existing large companies. Like, for example, you take a company like, I don't know, Boeing or Lockheed Martin. I mean, what is their moat? It's not like production of like aluminium, right? Like everyone can get aluminium. It's the bespoke knowledge of like how do you assemble these pieces of aluminium into a fighter jet,
Mm,
like, and how do you solve all of these myriad of little problems that you get, and it's
and
very difficult to replicate that, which is why, you know, competing in the aerospace business is super hard, right?
yeah,
They have a strong moat. The moat is basically this bespoke, long tail knowledge that's required to produce the best possible results.
yeah.
And I think something similar is kind of developing for AI, where basically, look, anyone's going to be able to get a foundation model, because a foundation model is really just a distillation of the internet into a machine learning model.
Mm,
The
mm,
internet is
mm.
basically public and open source,
Yeah.
so, it's not going to be hard to replicate that. And also the scientific, the scientific knowledge of how do you make a deep learning model at all is also all open source, and it's actually not. I mean, yes, there are a lot of
Yeah,
tricks
yeah, you
to
got
get
it.
to
Yeah.
work well, but the basic idea is not very hard. It's just a language model that works based on back propagation, and that is actually, I mean, it's not rocket science, right? Back propagation is something that you can study as a first year undergraduate.
Mm,
So yeah, I mean the basics of how the models work is not a particularly strong moat. Some of the tricks to get them to work well are still kind of a moat, but I think over the next couple of years we're going to see all of those little tricks that are not documented will all gradually leak out, and the open source models will fully catch up. As
mm,
far as I'm aware, open source models are about 12 months behind the best closed source models
mm,
at the moment.
mhm.
Uh,
So,
Although DeepSeek may have changed that, but it's not very much,
yeah,
right? 12 months is not very much.
yeah. So,
Um,
do we have a Moore's law for the bitter lesson yet? Do we, like, for measuring the bitter lesson, is there any sort of exponential Moore's
I
law?
don't know. I don't know. But yes, I mean so basically what the bitter lesson sort of means is that there isn't a single big technical secret that
Yeah, yeah.
you
Just
can
throw
use
more
to,
compute.
create your AI moat, right? But there are 1,000 little tricks to get your thing to work really well and really efficiently, and so on and so forth. But I think over time, what we'll find is the real moat will be the bespoke data sets.
Yeah, yeah.
Where like if you want your AI to be really good at, say, medicine, right? You can start with a foundation model, you can feed it a bunch of medical textbooks, and it'll be like, okay, right? But people are not going to want an okay doctor, They're
Yeah.
going to want the best
Yeah.
possible doctor.
Yeah.
And to make the best possible doctor, you're probably going to need these like really just bespoke medicine data sets that contain all sorts of things that basically encode the tacit knowledge that doctors have in a way that's easy for these AI models to learn. So basically, there will eventually be moats, and I think they will be quite centralizing. And once this has happened, imagine you're a doctor today, and your son wants to go to med school and become a doctor in 15 years, right? So, fast forward to 2040, your son graduates med school, and the best AI model is better than him
It will
at
ever
being a
be.
doctor,
Yeah.
right? So how is your son going to get employment? How's that going to happen,
Mm.
right? Who's gonna hire? Like maybe today people will hire human doctors because they're a little bit cautious, but
Yeah.
by 2040, um,
Same
it's
thing
just
as a
going to be like if you
taxi.
hire a human doctor, you're hiring an inferior product that costs more.
It's the same as a taxi. That it's the same dilemma
Yeah.
with hiring
I mean,
these.
I've already done this. I've had this. I was when I was in San Francisco. I went in one of these Waymo automated taxis, and it is a better ride than
Yeah.
Uber. Now, at the
Yeah.
moment, it's actually more expensive
Yeah.
than Uber
Yeah. But
in the
that's
daytime
just a matter of when.
because actually, the Waymo tech, the car and
The
the
LiDAR.
cameras and all of this stuff is actually like it is actually expensive,
Yeah.
right? Because you got to have the lidar and all of this
Yeah.
gun, right? But that's going to go down. That is a short-term thing. In
Yeah.
15 years' time, all of that tech, all of those sensors and stuff, they'll probably need fewer of them because the AI will be able to compensate more, and the ones that they do need will become much cheaper. And so all of the people who are currently Uber drivers will like, what are they going to do? If you're 40 years old or 50 years old and you're an Uber driver and that's what you've done for the last 10 years,
Yeah.
right? And
Retrain
suddenly
again.
AI comes and replaces you with a better Uber driver that's cheaper, what the hell are you going to do? Unemployed. It's the
Yeah.
only possible thing for a lot of these people, right? I mean, they're not going to get employed as poets or anything, are they?
And this is what I love thinking about the future, and I really want to make sure that we also leave time for the ice colonization. But
Sure.
we can't predict the ways that the new jobs will come about, and I'm starting to see maybe it's just a niche marketplace, but like Meta with their LLMs, flooding the internet. Internet feels like it's dying. It's cool that we have LLMs and that we can
Yeah.
do these things and everything like that. But the internet that I grew up with seems like it's not going to be around much longer.
Kind of. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there might be instances of it. There might be, like things like Urbit that maybe saved parts of it, but for the mass participation on the internet feels like there's a ticking time bomb there. And but there will be sort of opportunities to create like I've been thinking toying around with the idea of doing a physical newsletter again. And just because if you get it in a piece of paper, it's not AI generated. And for some people,
Why?
that's what? Oh, well, yeah, sorry. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You
Why,
could
why can't an
easily,
AI?
yeah, you could easily do it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, interesting. There is no proof. Well, so this brings to mind a conversation I was having with friends. Is is there any way to do proof of human work, proof of human attention,
Right.
either on the
Mm.
internet or outside the
Well,
internet?
yeah, so okay, that's an interesting question, and that's something that we're interested in working on right now. I've got a few collaborators who are working on this. Basically, we don't think we can do proof of human work, but we
Mm.
can do proof that an AI did something,
Mm.
right? Because you can method. So there's a technology called zero knowledge machine learning that allows you to prove that you've done a certain computation, right? Without revealing the computation. Um, Now it's kind of a little bit in its infancy at the moment, but we can basically prove that an AI did something. Now you might say, well, that's the opposite of what you want.
Yeah.
You don't want People don't want you to prove an AI did it. They want you to prove a human did it. But I
Yeah.
think with the right incentives, I think it will be possible to convert the one into the other.
Mm.
And also, over time, I think people might actually not care whether an AI produced something.
Mm.
They might care more whether about what kind of AI it is and what its instructions are. So, for example, if you're worried about sort of dead internet theory,
Mm.
right? Um, and you go to a
Mm.
website and all the content there is fantastic, it's really insightful, it's helped you to improve your life, you've made a bunch of friends, etc., etc. And they say, oh, they were all AIs, right?
Yeah.
You might not care. right? You might be like, well, look, it was great. It was a great website. It was fantastic. I really got a lot of value out of it. It solved my problems for me, right? But like if you go to a website and you see all the replies, and I've seen these types of replies on Twitter,
Yeah.
it's like, wow, that was a really great comment about blockchain. Here, why don't you listen to, such and such for their blockchain advice, and you can sign up for their paid services. So basically, the first thing that people want to do once they have AI is it's kind of like the first thing people wanted to do once they had email, they want to do spam, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of the reason that people are annoyed about AI generated content is because it's AI generated spam.
Damn.
It's
Yeah.
low quality, it's low effort. So really just kind of having a decentralized rating system for AI generated content could be huge, right?
Yeah.
Because people want to know, look, I know I'm talking to an AI, right? But is it like
Yeah.
a high quality AI that's and is it trying to exploit me in some way? Is it trying to scam me,
Mm,
right? What is the prompt that this AI I'm talking to was actually given, right?
mm,
Or at least if I'm not allowed to see the prompt, I want to know that that prompt has certain properties. Like
mm.
the AI was not told to try and scam me. The AI was not told to try and influence me in any undue way, etc., etc., etc. So actually just sort of rating these AIs and sort of giving them like a pedigree in a way could be pretty huge.
So,
That sort of ties into what I was saying earlier with ownership and control.
uh,
So if we can get these AI systems to implement versions of the informal rules that we use to run nice human societies, um, we can maybe actually preserve those societies through the AI transition. But we need a way to basically, do quality
yeah.
assurance, decentralized quality assurance, decentralized alignment assurance on these AIs, right? Because if you just talk to an AI on Meta or Facebook or Twitter or whatever, you have no idea what this AI is actually trying to do just by seeing a few samples of its text output, right?
Mm.
So basically having a sort of pedigree service for AIs, I think that could be
So
quite useful.
there, and
And we
there's
have
a
a few collaborators who are trying to work on that.
And there's somebody interested in doing work on this. I just interviewed a few days ago called Equistamp. And Equistamp has a very interesting idea on evaluations, because as you may know, maybe listeners don't know that essentially evaluations are serving as a sort of marketing for these foundational models where they
Yeah.
all the models have trained on the evaluation questions, which are all part of the training data set. And so they know all the questions. And so they'll immediately answer the questions, but then and they'll get it right unless there's some variation in some sort of that isn't in the published in the training data, and they'll get it wrong. And so Equistamp basically creates a human baseline on various competency tasks, which I find
Hmm.
like an interesting idea. But so we got about 20 minutes left. And I want to make sure that we talk about the ice colonization. So, but you just presented a world where it's sort of like there's the existential risk. What about the non-exit? What about the solar punk future? What about the like the idea that we're going into space or that we're going to colonize places we've never colonized? Can you talk more about what draws your interest into that?
Well, I have a very simple thesis with ice colonization, and it's so simple it's embarrassing that nobody else has come up with it. But it's basically that space colonization was a mistake that was caused by a combination of the human Western tradition of worshipping the sky god, which goes all the way back to, thousands of years BC.
Uh-huh.
Sky Father, right? That's the Proto-Indo-European name of the god,
Uh-huh.
which we all worship under different names. Zeus, Thor,
Mithras.
like Yahweh, aka the Christian God, they're all Sky Father. So, like our particular Western civilization, all of European civilization basically had a sky god that it worshipped. And I think, once people invented flight, we were really taken by it. Flight's extremely useful. And so the obvious next thing to do was space, and then you have Star Trek and stuff like that. But when you just look at the actual physics and engineering of space colonization, it's pretty horrific. Um,
Why?
and
What?
space
What? What are some things there?
Well, first of all, if you wanted to transport a person, let's say, from America to Europe, you can do that for about $400, right? Depending on how good a deal you get. If you want to transport a person from Europe to the closest part of space, which is about 200 miles up, you're like talking about multiple millions.
Hmm.
Okay, just to even go there.
Well, that'll
Um,
change, right? Like that the transportation from America to Europe on an airplane probably was pretty expensive. It was probably like 3 or 4K when it first started, right? But not it's not the same exponential.
yeah, I mean, um, transatlantic flight has gotten somewhat cheaper
Yeah,
and a lot safer. Um, but ultimately, it's not that hard to cross the Atlantic,
yeah.
right? You need a plane, okay, that's got like, an aluminium prop motor, and you need like an aluminium, you need like probably an aluminium body. You could maybe do it with like a wooden cloth large biplane if you really tried. It's not that hard to do, right? Um, Getting to space is super hard. Getting
Mm,
to orbit is
mm,
super hard. Okay,
mm,
getting into space but not staying there, okay, that's a little bit cheaper, right?
mm,
But getting into orbit requires extreme amounts of kinetic energy,
mm,
like extreme, you're talking about an orbital velocity of 10 kilometers per second,
mm.
um, and kinetic energy goes as the square of velocity. So, this is just outrageous amounts of energy have to be put in. Then you have the problems with the rocket equation and so on.
Uh-huh.
Making rockets reusable, in terms of Elon Musk stuff, that does cut the cost down, but it's still going to be expensive. It's still going to be like $1,000 per kilogram
Mm.
below Earth orbit.
And then this is just per kilogram. So that like all we're doing right now is putting satellites into space. I just found out about a company called Luna, which has stock prices increased rapidly because in 2024 they put something on the moon, and they're not even putting humans on the moon. They're just going to put a drill, a rover, and something else on the moon.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so talking about the amounts of just massive amounts of stuff that we could put in the space would be very expensive, and there may be
Mhm.
no sort of conciliatory way to get a lot of those things up there
I
cheaply.
mean, if you want to transport a ton of material from China to America, you can probably do it for like, $15 or $20.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
depending
yeah,
on what the stuff is, how
yeah,
big the bulk is,
yeah.
the cost per ton kilometer of bulk cargo is like some tiny fraction of a cent. If you want to transport a ton to space, you're probably talking about $1 million, even on, the most not nobody can even do it for $1 million yet, as far
Uh-huh.
as I'm
Uh-huh.
right. Like that is the goal. That is the I've spoken to people, the realistically achievable version of SpaceX cost to low Earth orbit is between 250,000 to $1 million per ton to low Earth orbit,
Yeah,
right?
I'm
To go
perplexed.
to go to to go to
Perplexed.
China
Uh-huh.
to go to China, instead of 250,000 to $1 million, it's like $10 to transport a ton from China or to
Yeah.
China.
So SpaceX Falcon 9 costs about 2.72 million per ton.
Yeah.
Mhm. So okay, so that's why no space. Why ice colonization?
So you got to think, what can we colonize if not space, right? And I actually think the correct answer to this is basically the oceans. The
Uh-huh.
oceans are bigger than Mars,
Yeah.
right? Earth's oceans are bigger than Mars. Mars is a small planet.
Uh-huh.
Okay. The oceans cover 70% of Earth. So when you combine those two together, just the high seas, so that's the part of the oceans that's more than 200 nautical miles away from any land, is still bigger than Mars. Now, the oceans have some benefits over Mars. Number one, it's easy to get to them,
Mm,
right?
mm,
If you want to transport cargo in bulk to an ocean colony, it's going to be $10 a ton
mm,
instead
mm,
of $1 million a ton.
mhm,
Pretty good, huh?
mhm.
And that $1 million is only taking you to low Earth orbit. It's not taking you to Mars. It's going to be
Yeah.
more like $10 million per ton to
Mhm.
go to Mars,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Optimistically, right? Um, So it's cheap to move stuff there, which means it's cheap to build. Now, the International Space Station is about the size of an apartment in terms of its square footage. Cost $150 billion. So to build one single apartment in the closest part of space cost $150 billion.
Uh-huh. Got
This International Space Station has like a
it.
kind of like a couple of people, like an apartment's worth of people in it. A cramp like a kind of cramped apartment's worth of people,
Yeah.
right? Um But if you took that $150 billion and you built an ocean colony, it could be the size of Manhattan.
And this kind of relates to what we are talking about AI, because in the network state, and a question I wanted to ask you about as well, which is this idea that we're not in the industrial age, we're now firmly in the information age, although that could be argued,
Mhm.
but that's my point. It was that we're in the information age. The nation state, although still very powerful and relevant, is not as relevant as it once was. And now the information is sort of so I'm now living in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and I'm going to go get my residency and potentially maybe
Mhm.
even my passport down here. And so the idea that I can just move to another country, which at the moment seems more aligned with what I'm interested in doing with my life, and
Mhm.
that this is just the first tiny round of that, and that as
Yeah,
the industrial age sort of changes and the nation state changes, we're going to have a lot more options of where to go, and those options,
potentially.
yeah, will create like or an ocean colony. And it's funny because actually I don't know if you ever heard of Blue Seed, but Blue Seed was a cruise ship put off the coast of San Francisco, 12 miles off
Yeah.
international waters. And their idea was that basically the visa situation, which has just kind of entered again into the discourse, was a big
Yeah.
problem back then. And so they were going to have a cruise ship with a bunch of foreign founders living off the coast on this giant cruise ship. And that was the first sort of real attempt at seasteading. And so it's an interesting idea. What do you want to go into for the last 10 minutes? This sort of network age opportunity to decentralize AI, or more deeper into seasteading and why nobody's done it
Well,
yet?
just to quickly finish that off, the reason that I think, colonizing the ocean is a good idea is because um if there is a new sort of industrial revolution powered by AI,
Mm,
um and if it also involves, say, for example, a nuclear renaissance, which I
mm,
think is plausible,
mhm,
because AI is going to demand a lot
yeah,
more physical just power, right? And the only way that we're going to be able to deliver that power is going to be nuclear power.
mhm,
Renewables are not going to cut it for AI because the AI chips are very expensive. You can't leave them idle for like 18 hours a day if because it's not sunny, right? So you need constant baseload power. You means you need nuclear,
mm,
especially at the kind of like yeah, okay, maybe you could have like a battery backup if it's just a few megawatts, but if you need like 100 gigawatts, right? You're not going to build a 100 gigawatt battery backup, right?
mm.
You're going to build a
Nuclear power plant. Got it.
incredibly large or a complex of many large nuclear reactors to send you that 100 gigawatts of power, right? And that is eventually where these AI systems are going. You could try and do it with solar, but again, you'd have the problem of how do you like deal with the cool time. So basically, or sorry, with nighttime and cloudy weather, because even
Mm,
in sunny places, you still have nighttime. So I think we probably are going to have a nuclear renaissance. I think we probably are going to have an industrial renaissance powered by the robots.
mm,
And so if you put those two things together, I think it means that land becomes at a premium again. And one of the biggest difficulties with making an ocean colony is actually just the raw energy that you need to
mm,
make the materials. So
mm.
concrete is very energy intensive. If you want to make a concrete ocean colony, most of the reason you can't do that is the cost of energy,
To
right?
make the concrete to create a land in the ocean?
Yeah,
Okay.
so you can create a
Oh,
floating
interesting.
concrete um
Is it tethered to the
island.
ocean floor?
You could tether it to the ocean floor, yeah. So most of the reason that that's not feasible is that
Yeah.
concrete is about $200 a ton.
Yeah.
If concrete was instead $20 a ton, which I
Uh,
think is feasible with
uh,
nuclear power,
yeah.
then you could basically build a floating Manhattan out of concrete, and it would be on a per square kilometer or per square mile basis. It would cost people about an extra $100 or $200 in rent a month to have it, which
But
is not very
you,
much.
then you run into a favorite problem of mine, which is how do you build a city? And the fact that cities take long times for people to actually enjoy them. And so like a city like Buenos Aires that I really deeply enjoy and the walkable nature of it and such was built little by little with various
Yeah.
centralizers coming in and copying Haussmann from Paris and making this beautiful city. Like that took a long time, and creating an empty city is like you need to have a sort of Joseph Smith of the Mormon type of crazy energy in order to bring enough people to it, basically.
Well, I'll drink some energy drinks then.
Yeah. See some golden pipes and
I don't think
then
this is going to be hard though. I think the hard part that really prevents this is the high cost of energy. And I think that's probably going to come down. Now, the other thing you can do if you want to make it cheaper is you can make it out of ice, which is
mm.
where ice colonization comes from. Um, but a city made out of ice, you can make ice. Ice is very cheap, right?
Oh,
It costs less than $1 to make a ton of ice, right, out of seawater. So you can
interesting.
take seawater, desalinate it, and freeze it, and it's less than $1
Oh,
to make that per ton, which is very cheap. And if you put a little bit of sawdust or some kind of wood pulp in it, you get pykrete.
huh.
Um, so it's very cheap per ton. You only need to insulate the outside, so you're just insulating a thin shell around it, and so you can make an ice island. And me and a couple of enthusiasts have done some modeling of this, and it seems totally feasible to do.
Do you
Um,
need to be have it be in a place that's cold all the time?
no, because you would cool it actively.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So you can put it wherever you want, and because the ice needs to be kept at about -50 degrees, it doesn't really matter whether it's in a hot place or a cold place. 'Cause even the coldest place on Earth is still a lot hotter. The water is still going to be at zero, right?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
It's still going to be a lot hotter than -50. So the difference between -50 and zero is 50 degrees. The difference between -50 and 25 is only 75. So it's a small difference in your cooling requirements. So you don't really care. And the cooling requirements are very modest for a kilometer-sized ice city. Your cooling requirements are only about 10 megawatts, which if you're an engineer, you'll say, wow, 10 megawatts is not very much,
Uh-huh.
right? It's about a dozen Tesla fast chargers worth of electricity.
Uh,
Not very much.
okay, so last 5 minutes, where does the AI, where does your vision of AI fit into the ice colonies and everything else? Like, what's your take on the network state and essentially like, is that the path, a potential path in order to not be existentially wiped out by
I
legalistic?
think so, yeah. I think basically, in order for humans to survive, we need to create AI-powered network states that are dedicated
Mm,
to preserving our way of life,
mm,
that are a home
yeah,
for us,
yeah,
rather than that are designed to be pure profit maximizers.
yeah,
Because we are approaching a point in history where the economy is quite simply going to do to humans what it did to horses after trucks and cars were invented, which is
yeah.
basically shoot them and take them to the glue factory.
Yeah, and it's funny because I'm down here in Argentina where there's a bunch of horses, probably the most per capita per horses, maybe outside the Middle East, but up there basically, and it's for polo. A lot of people use them still for economic means out in the countryside and everything like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's an interesting that we're going to be the same way. And what I like about your philosophy is that it is humanistic at its core, which is a revolt against Nick Land, who seems like he's just totally hopeless in terms of the human in the loop. What do you think?
Yeah, I guess. I'm not as black pilled as Nick Land. I think it is possible. I think people have underestimated the degree of freedom that there is, or the
Mm.
degree of
Hmm.
flexibility there is in what the future looks like.
Yes.
If you look at the past, you have countries like, Cambodia or the Soviet Union or China in the Cultural Revolution that basically use technology to, commit some kind of industrial slaughter of humans
Hmm.
to crush people's culture. A lot of the stuff that happened in the Soviet Union is brushed under the carpet, but the Soviet Union committed cultural genocides as well as actual genocides.
Um,
They would take a people from their ethnic republic and they would basically deport them to Siberia. So if you lived in the west of the Soviet Union, you would get deported to the Far East. If you lived in the east, you would maybe get deported to the west. And this was done to deliberately homogenize and weaken people so they couldn't rebel. And the result is that when the Soviet Union collapsed, um, there were a bunch of completely listless, cultureless, homeless people who didn't really belong anywhere. It was super dysfunctional. And the advantage in that system lay with basically organized crime. And you could say Putin is kind of like an organized criminal who got all the way to the top.
Yeah.
He did brush shoulders with and associate with a St. Petersburg mafia before he
Yeah.
actually took over as president of Russia. So, um, like technology and essentially history can be used to sort of annihilate people, but
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be that way. There are plenty of places where things have gone better, right? There's a lot of variance in outcomes in the world. And I think, you know, we shouldn't be too black-pilled because there's going to be even more potential variance in the
Well,
future. And
well,
really getting a good outcome depends on us
yeah,
taking
they are
control
energy
of
and intention being molding these things rather than the current San Francisco vibe, which is just like, oh, I'm just gonna sit here and wait till AGI. Why would I invest or anything like that? And like,
Yeah, I think this
yeah,
is super dumb.
yeah.
Like this is super stupid. Yeah.
There's one thing I got in this interview, which is that it's not the industrial age is over. It's the information age is going to reinvigorate the industrial age, so that there will be a sort of
I
an
think that will
yeah,
happen, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
and then
because
yeah,
information and physical materials are sort of cofactors in production, right? So if you reduce the cost of intelligence a lot, that's going to incentivize people to build more machines and build more physical plant, build more nuclear reactors, build more factories, etc.
okay, beautiful. We got to end it, but thank you so much. How can people find out more about your work?
So I have a blog at transhumanaxiology.com. And I'm also on Twitter at @RoccoNeich.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Appreciated.